All right. Welcome to our podcast, Voice. Joel, thank you so much for joining our program.
I am absolutely delighted to be here speaking with you, Shuke.
Yeah, so we met last September this year at your office. Very
Yes,
historic.
it seems like yesterday. We're delighted
Mm,
to have you here in New York.
mm. Yeah, I was really impressed with the ambience of your office. It's very historic, and yeah. So as a Buddhist who often help Japanese people to celebrate and celebrate the meeting with their ancestor. Your place seems full of ancestors.
Your intuition is amazing to me. That this is a great place to start the conversation. And I say the word place, the power of place. So you came to our office on East 64th Street in Manhattan. And you're right, it is a historic building. And you also came at a important time because we've just completed a renovation project of the building to make it fit for, as I like to say, the next 100 years. We are a 110-year-old organization. We celebrated our 100th anniversary in 2014. And shortly after that period of time, we decided that the place that we occupy, this physical space on 64th Street, is actually central to our identity as an organization, as a historic organization. And so we reinvested in this building to make it modern. When I say modern, I meant to have heat in the winter and cooling in the summer, bright lights, new furniture, but to have it to be an inviting place that's really alive for particularly younger people who are coming to us now, next generation. And it was an interesting project to take this historic place and to honor that history. You'll remember in the room that you were sitting, there was a portrait of Andrew Carnegie that was watching us as
Yes.
we were speaking. And we want to retain that history and channel that history. It's really important to who we are, but it's really for us today and into the future. And so, again, just in that physical space, thinking about this place as a place where people come because of the legacy and because of what it stands for and the values and so on. We can talk about that. But what's really important is what we do with that today and how we sort of think about taking it into the future. And I believe the place is important. Yeah. So we can talk about that as well.
So I briefly went through the history of your council.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was founded in 1914, and when Andrew Carnegie, the founder of your council, assembled a group of leaders in religion, academia, and politics.
Mm-hmm.
So the over more than 110 years ago, the religious leaders were there. So yeah, I'm pretty much impressed with this fact, and the intention, the was like this. Through this, assemble, the founder Carnegie hoped to make war obsolete,
Yeah.
which sounds very much, unfortunately, still relevant to today's world. Right.
Yes, we're in a moment, sadly, very much like the moment of 110 years ago. So Andrew Carnegie was a well-known person. He had a profile in public life that would probably be something like, Bill Gates, um, or Jeff Bezos or somebody like this that was known as one of the richest people in the world, most successful business people. But he had a vision for peace, as you're suggesting. He could see that the world was evolving. We were leaving an old order of the 19th century and moving into some kind of new order, if you will, or
Hmm.
arrangements for
Hmm.
the 20th century. And he genuinely believed that peace was possible as a practical matter. The idea now we're in an industrial world. We have these sort of means of industry, and the idea that we would use this for killing, for war, seemed actually improbable, but also immoral. And so the challenge was how to arrange global politics in a way that would facilitate the peaceful resolution of conflict. And he actually had a very simple idea, which is actually second nature to us now, which is what we now call international law and organization. He funded the building of the Peace Palace at The Hague.
Hmm.
And he wanted the leaders of all the great powers to sign treaties of arbitration, which meant that when they had a dispute, they would bring it to the court. And much like we have mechanisms for the peaceful resolution of conflict in domestic society, we would have that internationally. He believed that this would happen. And then we would also have a League of Nations
Hmm.
to help organize, collective, cooperative action towards, global scale issues as the world was evolving.
Hmm.
So Carnegie saw it as a very practical matter. However, and this gets to Carnegie Council,
Hmm.
he did think, and also his wife thought, that it was not enough to have the institutions of international law, of a League of Nations or international organization. There was another dimension
Hmm.
to human life, human behavior, which was moral, which was ethical, which was even spiritual, that we had to, the way that people think about war and peace, human rights, these kinds of things, was important. There was an ethical dimension, a moral dimension. And part of his effort was to mobilize that.
Hmm.
And that was the part of the founding of our council, because he had founded other organizations. You know that there are other organizations with the Carnegie name.
Hmm.
Um, but this one was supposed to be special in the sense of being a place of convening, a place of meeting, a place of education, where there would be a focus on what that moral, ethical, spiritual dimension for peace would be. And as you say, Shuke, the reason that, so he was thinking, well, how do I do this? So he reached out to religious leaders,
Hmm.
community leaders, academic leaders who were, um, you know, in that world and promoting those kinds of ideas, because he thought those ideas mattered.
Hmm. Yeah. So Andrew Carnegie is obviously the yeah, the most important ancestor as the president of your council. But I also love to listen to your personal ancestors. So which must be part of the the reason you eventually joined this council, right?
Well, thank you for that. Before I will get to that, just before I leave Mr. Carnegie behind, I feel a very special relationship with him in a way.
Hmm.
I think I mentioned to you when we met, and if people are listening to this podcast, they can see on our website, it's published. At the occasion of the 100th anniversary of Carnegie Council, I decided to sit down and have my own personal conversation with Andrew Carnegie. So I wrote him a letter. 100 years later, you can see my letter to Andrew
Yes.
Carnegie. Yes. And also relevant to this conversation. So I did that, and it was a useful exercise. But when we had our ceremony here in New York, I was asked to give a speech to our community. I had already written that letter, so I thought, what am I going to do? So I decided to write a letter to our successors 100 years from now. So when they have the 200th anniversary of Carnegie Council. And you can see the results if you want to read them on our website. But it was a very powerful exercise for me, and it made me think about why this institution is so important, because it connects us to our ancestors, and to those who come after us. As a young person, I was very skeptical of institutions. Yeah, they seem very traditional and maybe part of the problem. But now that I'm older, I can see the value of connecting to the past, to the present, to the future. And I will say that writing the letter to the future was much more difficult than writing the letter to the past. Is sort of interesting. In terms of my own personal ancestors, yeah, I occupy something of a familiar place in American culture, if you will. My grandparents were immigrants to this country. So I am a third generation American. My grandparents were all born in Europe. They came to this country to escape oppression. They were Jewish refugees who left Europe under difficult circumstances. All four of my grandparents were very, very grateful to have the opportunity to come to the United States. So they were very much of that generation. We're thankful to be here. That was clearly passed down to me through my parents, and that was a very important part of my formation. Was the oppressive and difficult past of my ancestors. They suffered, and they came. They had a story though of freedom and prosperity. So this was very much part of my formation. My grandparents spoke with accents, so they had to some. So I think that all of this is very much part of the way I see the world. I was very fortunate. So my grandparents were very important. As it goes back further than my grandparents, very difficult for me. You get into the mists of time. It's all almost mythology of the sort of Jewish diaspora of Eastern and Central Europe of the 19th and 18th century. Yeah, to me, it's just mythology. So it only becomes personal through my grandparents and my parents. But again, it's a very familiar story of sort of, at least of the Jewish immigration to this country of the early 20th century. But you also will see this pattern in other ethnic groups that came to the United States. And this is where we get to the religion part. This is what this fascinates me too, in terms of the concept of pluralism, which is one of the things that I was privileged to see as a third generation American. I could see that my experience, my religious experience, my religious education, the culture, and the process of assimilation into the United States, I could see this mirrored very clearly in other groups, whether they were Christian or Muslim or other groups. You can see it's a sort of a familiar pattern. I don't mean to be too simplistic or reductive about it, but it actually helped me to understand. And I think part of the reason interreligious dialogue makes sense to me is because I had a strong foundation in terms of understanding a religion, understanding its culture, understanding its ritual, its meaning, you know, you know, for my family. And so I could recognize that in other experiences as well.
Yeah. So, um, you feel strong connection with your grandparents and your ancestors.
I
Still.
do. I do.
Mm-hmm.
Much to my surprise, I think I feel them very present. I don't know if this is something unique to me. I will tell you, my parents both passed away relatively recently, within the last 2 years, and
Mm.
but I think the biggest surprise is the presence that I feel. They still feel very much present. I feel very fortunate that way for my family, but also other close friends, mentors. Yeah, they still feel very present in my life. So I feel very, very lucky
Mm.
that way. Not that I don't miss them, but maybe because they had a strong character. So many times I feel like I know what they would say, so I have some comfort in that. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
Um, I believe
yeah.
your life history must be part of the reason you eventually join Carnegie Council and now working on ethical issues.
I think that's right. And just in terms of my own biography here, one of my preoccupations at the moment, it's a little bit the way Carnegie felt, that how we were leaving one century and entering another. I do feel we are at a moment in our sort of national and international life, if we can kind of zoom out to the macro picture, the big picture. Very big changes, and I feel some sense of responsibility to be that bridge between what I consider some of the good values and experiences, and actually some of the bad as well, right? Some of the things that we've learned from history,
Mm.
to pass these along. Again, this is a function perhaps of my age, but I also think it's something that is happening in the world as we leave the kind of, as we say, the post World War II era, the end of the Cold War. We are entering into something new. I tend to be an optimist, and I think things should evolve, things should change. I hope change for the better, but I think that part of that process should be genuine engagement and learning from where we've been.
Mm.
And I worry a little bit that lessons of the past, and people just move along maybe too quickly and don't think enough or reflect enough about where we've been.
Mm. Uh, uh, which might result in the repeating the same kind of failure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Sure. So the Carnegie Council has been working hard on ethics in international affairs so far, and I think at any decades, so the focus should have been changing, right? So from your perspective and in your reflection, what is the characteristic of the ethical issues today compared to the previous decades?
Yeah. When I look at the world now, there are some similarities, but there's also some change. So the similarity is the idea that the world is fragmented, but I feel like it's fragmenting more and more at exactly the time when the challenges that we face will require collective action, cooperative action. So these two things are happening simultaneously, and so this is of sort of more urgent concern, right? So we have more nationalism, more populism, more my country first kind of approaches at exactly the time when the global scale challenges that will require cooperative arrangements seem to be more urgent. So the two most, well, maybe three obvious ones would be the issues of war and peace. This past year has been quite concerning, both in Europe and the Middle East, and of course, Asia as well is of concern. I don't think it's something we can ignore. Again, so the politics are fragmenting at the time when we really should be talking more about cooperation. Give you just one example. I see starting to see more discussion of this, but just even the question about nuclear weapons. We've had a fairly robust, and I can say somewhat successful, set of arrangements for arms control, since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? Those weapons have not been used. But what I worry about is that now we have really, the non-proliferation regime is very, very weak, getting weaker, and we have a buildup of nuclear waste. So anyway, this is an issue that and that's just one in the war and peace camp. Just to give you a sense that I think we need more cooperative conversation, dialogue, effort. And what concerns me now is that we don't really see much there, while the situation on the ground in several places is quite alarming. So that's the war and peace area. The other is climate, right? So we all know the situation, and yet the alignment for to address this issue. Again, it should be within human reason and human possibility to do better, to address the relationship of humanity to nature. But again, we seem to be behind where we should be. And again, this is something from a time perspective seems more urgent as things move quickly. The third area would be emerging technology. And again, I know it's almost cliche at this point, but it's nevertheless here. We're talking in a way that we couldn't have done this in the way that we're doing this. A generation ago. I remember my first. I know you're in Japan and I'm in New York, and my first when I first started my career, anytime we worked with our friends in Japan, it was almost exclusively by fax. And I would send a fax, and then I would go home, and then I would come the next day, and then the reply fax would be in the fax machine because of the time change, etc. So, it was very different then. But anyway, that's very quaint. But what I'm talking about now is, artificial intelligence and how it's going to shape our world from an ethical perspective. And again, I really do believe this is a global scale issue that we will have our own local and national efforts to deal with. The results on many different levels, from the future of work to just the future of culture generally, and in communications, et cetera. But again, I think this is an area where conversations like the one that we're having, we need high level conversation, thoughtful conversation from leaders about how we want this technology to work for humanity as opposed to against it in some way.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your perspective.
Yeah.
What I see very interesting today is that, when I visited your office in September, the United Nations adopted the Declaration on Future Generations, right? And it is very interesting from the ethical point of view, because the Declaration on future generations basically means we are living in the world where we need to, see the invisible people to be born in the future as a real important stakeholders in this society. So we are living in the fragmented world where it is very difficult to have consensus internationally unanimously, but still we can make an agreement consensus over involving more people from the future to today's society. In other words, we can agree agree to be a good ancestor for the future generation, right?
I agree very strongly with that. And I think one of the things that surprised me so much about the political environment that we're in right now is I think you can divide the some of our leaders between those who would understand what you just said and those who wouldn't. I have been quite surprised actually because maybe it's because it's so much a part of me. It's also intuitive for me to think in the way you just described. But I have realized there are people walking around and people in responsible positions who don't think that way. They just think that when they're not here, it doesn't matter. I won't be here, and that's quite a shock to me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't quite figured out the way to reach these people, or if there's a way to persuade them. But it's maybe I've been too naive over too long a period of time to not understand that that's some people, that's how they perceive life and they perceive society. It's when it's over for them, it doesn't matter. So this is one of the reasons I think your project is so important. I also really like what you said about, we talk a lot about inclusivity, and it's very, very important when we talk about ethics in the 21st century that we are genuinely inclusive. And I think this idea of including the future, friends of ours, you may know them. It's called the Ethics Center in Australia. They're based in Sydney. And Simon Longstaff is the director there. He's a wonderful person. I've learned a lot just watching him and what he does. I believe that he and his institution instituted this idea, but when they have panel discussions and debates, they have the panel and then they have an empty chair.
Yes.
The empty chair, yes, and and as you were speaking, it made me think of that, because the empty chair, yeah, we can think about people who don't have voice or people who don't have the opportunity to be in such places to participate. So this is important. But now when I think about the empty chair, maybe we need another empty chair, or maybe this empty chair could also represent future generations, people who will be affected by the things that we do. Yeah.
Right. So the
Yeah.
empty chair for
Yeah.
ancestors, and
Yeah.
another one is for the future generation.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So at the end of this podcast, I love to ask you a question around how we can become a good ancestor for the future generation. So when I ask this question to leaders, most of them think of what kind of legacy we can leave for the future generation. Yes, so you could think of that. But I also think it is very important to think of what not to leave for the future generation. So we need to we have something we need to stop in our generation. So that we don't need to not necessarily to bring this to the next generation. So in uh, so with this question, what kind of things do you come up in your mind?
Oh, thank you. I really like the way you answered the question. I think that that is a great place to start, but we should not leave the next generation with, I'll use the word our debts, right? We should, but
Yeah,
we can think of that financially, right? That's an easy way to think about it. We shouldn't pass that along to them, right? They
of
shouldn't have to pay
course.
our bills. But also, if you think about the climate, the planet, other, you know, our feuds, right? Our disagreements, our conflict. I mean, we should do our best to give them a clean slate, right? The ability to move forward. And I think that's. Thank you for saying that. I think it should be emphasized more as a place to start because that's something we can do. I think sometimes with legacy, you can think about it. It gets it goes to vanity, so I sometimes get uncomfortable with that. How do you want to
Yeah.
be remembered? Right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So who,
Yeah.
in some ways, who cares in the sense of no, it's what you do.
Yeah.
And what you were suggesting, these are things that we can do. Clean up, if you will,
Yeah.
clean up
All
our
right.
debts.
All
Yeah,
right.
clean up our debts. Um, and that's it. I think that's a great place to start. I also think that to be a good ancestor is to pass along, right? This sort of DNA I was mentioning to you before of
Mm-hmm.
Andrew Carnegie, right? That there are some values that need to be adapted, they need to evolve, they need to live, they need to grow. But I do think that that's an important, to help the formation of the next generation so that they have access to those traditions, right? Um, and that's a long conversation because tradition is a difficult word because I don't mean
Mm-hmm.
it to be in a way that constrains. I mean it to be in a way that empowers. So, but to make sure we pass along that those values,
Mm.
I think that's incredibly important because I believe for the next generation we should leave them with a foundation, a strong foundation that they can build on. Yeah, that's kind of how I think
Yeah.
about it. I don't think we should try to leave the house, the building,
Mm-hmm.
but again, the foundation, right, so that they can build their own. Yeah. Uh, so
Sure.
it's again, it's some of these things can tend to be cliche, so I try to avoid the cliches, but nevertheless, I think there are some important elements
Mm.
as whatever the
Y-
old saying, we should leave the place better than we found it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
So
yeah.
the
Yeah.
Carnegie
Yeah.
Carnegie
Yeah.
himself
Yeah.
want wanted not to bring the war to next generation,
Right.
right? So yeah, so this is the founding story of the council.
Right. Exactly. And the idea that we should always strive for improvement, right? That even if we don't get there, right, that we should be moving in this direction, and that's progress. That's what he meant by progress. We believe in that.
Yeah,
So yeah, yeah,
incrementally,
yes,
but hopefully we could find a way to make war obsolete more
yeah.
radically.
Right. Yeah. And also that the theme, we haven't talked much about it in the podcast, but that what unifies it is that there is something universal in the human experience, right? There is something common. There is some common humanity that we should never lose sight of and kind of work toward, as imperfect as that might be, that we shouldn't lose that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for sharing your time for our program, Voice. Yeah, I really enjoyed the hearing your voice.
I enjoyed it too. It's wonderful to do this, and I hope we can continue in person sometime soon.
Yes, thank you. So, okay, so for now, yeah, so it's closing. Thank you so much for joining.
Great.
See you again.
Thank you, Shuken. Thank you.